Last December, heavy metal band Damageplan took the stage at the Alrosa Villa. During their first set, more than 200 anxious fans packed the concert hall to hear the group and one of the country's most known guitarists, Dimebag Darrell Abbott, play. But just a few minutes into their first song, trouble broke out. You can see shooter Nathan Gale in a black jacket and baseball cap charging on a stage and pulling out a gun. He was headed straight for Dimebag Darrell, the band's lead guitarist.
December 8th, 2004. At the Alrosa Villa nightclub in Columbus, Ohio, the American heavy metal band Damageplan, first founded by brothers and ex-Pantera members Dimebag Darrell and Vinnie Paul, were booked for a performance which promoted their debut album in front of hundreds of devout fans. One of the show's roughly 400 ticket holders was a particularly eccentric fan named Nathan Gale, a 25-year-old veteran with a troubled past and an equally destructive parasocial relationship with Pantera and its members. A Chicago native, Gale lived his earliest years in a divorced household before moving in with his mother in Marysville, Ohio, leaving behind his father and two older brothers. In high school, Gale became fixated on heavy metal and Pantera in particular, but took his liking down an unhealthy path as he began to claim Pantera were stealing his identity, and especially more so when the band split up in later years. Gale graduated in 1998, and from there, developed an addiction to drug use, the start of his continuous downward spiral. Gale grew paranoid, erratic, and violent, and following frequent encounters with law enforcement, his mother had no choice but to kick him out of the house until he got clean. Fortunately for the family, Gale managed to do so after being homeless for some time, and even enlisted in the US Marines some 5 months after 9/11, though he was shortly discharged after being diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Now, the lives of Gale and Darrell Abbott had intersected before. During a Damageplan concert in April of 2004, Gale suddenly interrupted the performance and trashed $1,800 worth of stage equipment before being hastily escorted by police. Though the incident was shrugged off as a minor inconvenience, the same could not be said for what would take place 8 months later. This time, as Damageplan performed in front of 400, Gale rushed the stage with a semi-automatic pistol past Vinnie Paul's drum kit and charged at Abbott, grabbing his hair and fatally shooting him in the head. For a few moments, the crowd's reaction was a mix of shock and confusion, but the casualties didn't end there. Security Chief Jeffrey Thompson was shot by Gale after attempting to tackle him, before a fan named Nathan Bray was killed while attempting to aid the two victims, and Eric Hulk, another man who attempted to get involved, was mortally wounded by 6 shots. Just minutes after a 911 call, Officer James Nigmeyer arrived at the scene and ended the killing spree by fatally shooting Gale in the face with a 12-gauge shotgun. At 38 years old, guitarist Darrell Abbott was also pronounced dead at the scene. To this day, there is no official motive behind Gale's attack, though it is widely believed his mental illness, past drug usage, and frustrations with Pantera were all notable influences. Regardless, what took place in the Alrosa Villa nightclub was a scarring event, which affected lives both within and beyond its walls, and is just one of countless examples of when concerts turn into nightmares. A day forever shrouded in infamy. On October 1st, 2017, the world collectively mourned after news broke out of a mass shooting, which occurred at the Route 91 Harvest Country Music Festival on the Las Vegas Strip, perpetrated by one 64-year-old Stephen Paddock from the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel. Around 10 p.m. was when country singer Jason Aldean was giving the closing performance of the festival. In attendance were over 22,000 who had enjoyed the prior performances and could not have possibly imagined the impending scene they would find themselves in. Out of nowhere, hundreds of rifle rounds were fired into the oblivious festival audience, initially mistaking the gunfire for fireworks. Concertgoers were struck with horror as they began seeing bodies around them drop, and the audience immediately began fleeing the lot. Bullets only continued raining down for what felt like an eternity for those below. There were minutes where no one definitively knew where the shots were coming from or how many were shooting, but as security fences hindered escape attempts and more lives were lost, the pandemonium was only heightened. At 10:15 p.m., the firing finally ceased, but roughly 867 people were injured. In the evacuated Mandalay Bay Hotel, police breached Paddock's 32nd floor suites and found him dead on the ground from a self-inflicted gunshot wound through the head. Stephen Paddock, the son of a notorious American bank robber, is a man whose life has been examined for red flags time and time again. Though Paddock took his motives to the grave, it is known he was an alcoholic. It is known he spent months meticulously planning this tragedy, and it is known he had no prior convictions leading to October 1st, ultimately enabling him to purchase 55 firearms and extra equipment, as well as carry out the deadliest mass shooting committed by a lone gunman in American history. Excluding Paddock, 60 people were killed in the mass shooting, with 58 immediately dead. At the time dubbed the Woodstock of the West, the Altamont Speedway Free Festival was a free concert which took place on December 6, 1969, at the Altamont Speedway just west of Tracy, California. Some 300,000 were in attendance to see the likes of Santana, Grateful Dead, and the Rolling Stones perform at a musical celebration of the hippie movement. As high as expectations were then, however, the Altamont Free concert seemingly turned disastrous from the very beginning. Much of the catastrophe and violence which unfolded can be attributed to members of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, the most notorious outlaw motorcycle club in the world, largely thanks to an unlikely friendship between outlaw biker Sonny Barger and Grateful Dead guitarist Jerry Garcia. Grateful Dead used their powers as event organizers to hire the Hells Angels Club as security in exchange for $500 worth of beer. On paper, the Hells Angels were to maintain crowd control and prevent others from rushing on stage. Unsurprisingly, however, pairing this group of infamous outlaws with plentiful alcohol resulted in anything but safety. The Hells Angels grew drunker, the crowd grew restless, and the ensuing chaos affected everyone on and off stage. In the midst of the mayhem, a pregnant Denise Jukes of the Ace of Cups was struck in the head by a beer bottle from the crowd and suffered a skull fracture. Stephen Stills of Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young was repeatedly stabbed in the leg by a Hells Angel, and Grateful Dead subsequently pulled out of the event due to the immense violence. Shortly after, the Rolling Stones took the stage. By far the concert's most notorious incident took place. In attendance was 18-year-old Meredith Hunter Jr., just one of many restive crowd members, who jumped onto the stage during the Stones' performance of Under My Thumb. As Hunter then drew a revolver, a Hells Angel quickly grabbed him by his hair and pulled him down from where he was standing. Hunter attempted to retreat, but was pursued by 4 other Hells Angels who viciously assaulted him. One of the angels present, named Alan Pizarro, eventually stabbed Hunter in his back and twice in his head, killing him instantly. A subsequent trial saw Pizarro acquitted of his charges on grounds of self-defense, after later footage revealed Hunter drawing a gun with presumably malicious intent. Ultimately, Hunter's murder cemented the Altamont Free Concert as one of the most disastrous events in music history, one marked by bloodshed, turmoil, and unwarranted harm. Though she lived her life as a woman of humble origins, the death of Indonesian singer Irma Bule made international headlines after she was bitten by a venomous king cobra and succumbed to her injuries shortly thereafter. For context, one of the most popular genres in Indonesia is dangdut, a blend of folk music from various neighboring cultures. Popular among lower-class civilians, dangdut singers are often young women from poor backgrounds, and Irma was no different. A mother of 3 children, Irma began her career as a singer shortly after graduating from junior high school to make ends meet. The young lady would receive $20 per performance, and often relied on tips from the audience in a highly competitive market. However, given dangdut singers occasionally utilized a provocative set of dance moves known as goyang ular or snake dance moves, they were encouraged to perform with live snakes for a $5 bonus. Irma did so for roughly 3 years and became the talk of her town as such, further ensuring the snakes were non-venomous and their mouths were taped shut during her performances. However, on April 4th, 2016, a fatal oversight was made when Irma took the stage with a still-fanged king cobra, and it ultimately cost her life. In just the second song of her concert, Irma accidentally stepped on the tail of the snake she was wearing, and it immediately reacted by biting her on the leg. Overcome with shock and adrenaline, Irma refused to take an antidote offered by a snake handler, and instead continued singing for 45 minutes after the accident. But around this time was when the cobra's venom slowly set in. Suddenly, Irma collapsed on stage and began vomiting as well as having seizures. Irma was soon taken to a hospital by first responders, but with lethal toxins still in her bloodstream, she ultimately died at the age of 26. Irma's career as a dangdut singer and her untimely death speak volumes to the risks and exploitation Indonesian locals will endure just to escape poverty. In Irma's case, her name gained traction for all the wrong reasons, and she undoubtedly lost her life far too soon. In the American Southeast, 2021's Redneck Rave is remembered by many as one of the most notorious country festivals to take place in recent memory. Advertised as America's wildest and craziest country party, the Redneck Rave brought tens of thousands to the small Kentucky town of Mammoth Cave, with the 5-day festival including the likes of live country music, goldfish racing, a demolition derby, a football game, and much more. Though welcomed by event organizers, The anticipated chaos posed logistical problems for local law enforcement, who couldn't possibly contain a crowd more than double the town's population with such limited resources. As such, this truly was America's wildest country party, but one of nightmarish proportions. Over the course of 5 days, numerous attendees brought in meth, marijuana, and alcohol, and became increasingly intoxicated while present. This intoxication led to a string of bizarre and disturbing incidents, which overwhelmed local authorities. Among the more violent occurrences, a 29-year-old man named Lancer Hodges strangled a woman to the point of unconsciousness over an argument about a blanket. Another man had his throat slashed by a friend after a drunken argument drastically escalated, and someone else driving a side-by-side vehicle was impaled in the abdomen by a log, which broke through the floorboard as he drove over it. An injury so odious, first responders were forced to leave the log in his abdomen while airlifting him to a hospital. Many others also suffered severed fingers, broken bones, dislocated joints, and severe lacerations. All in all, 48 attendees faced varying charges at this American hellhole of a festival, with 30 being drug and alcohol related, and felony charges such as assault, strangulation, and drug trafficking also in the mix. Despite the utterly disastrous results, however, event organizer Justin Stowers was seemingly satisfied with how the 2021 Redneck Rave turned out, though still stating, "We can definitely improve on a lot of things to make for a safer festival environment." In a Facebook post, Stowers further wrote, "This was the biggest event we've ever done, and with as many people and random things that popped up unexpectedly, I feel like we all handled it very well. For the negative Nancys, we will put a complaint box by the Porta Johns next time for ya." On August 19th, 2010, the folk rock duo of the Swell season performed an outdoor concert at the Mountain Winery, located within the town of Saratoga, California. Within the Redwoods, a devout crowd of 2,000 concertgoers were expecting a charming and satisfying live experience, but what would eventually unfold during those evening hours can only be described as traumatizing. Out of nowhere, those in attendance spotted a man standing on the venue's rooftop, roughly 35 to 40 feet above the stage. Confusion spread initially, but just as the audience noticed, the man threw himself off the roof and landed ghastly mere feet away from singer Glenn Hansard. For a moment, it felt like the entire world stopped, as the crowd and band had just witnessed a live. The victim was eventually identified as a 32-year-old man named Michael Edward Pickles, attending the Swell season concert with a friend at the time. Pickles had recently been released from jail on a bail of $150,000 after being charged with assault with a firearm, domestic violence, and false imprisonment. This came after Pickles bound his girlfriend and threatened to commit a murder involving the two on New Year's Day, but she was able to talk him out of it before he surrendered to authorities. At the concert, Pickles left his belongings with his friend and made his way to the rooftop without any warning. Even with the luck of one of the fellow concertgoers being a doctor, all CPR attempts failed, and Pickles was pronounced dead at the scene. One YouTube user named Kiton, who was present at the very concert, has confirmed they do in fact have footage of Pickles, but have sworn never to show it to anyone except the police and band members, making it one of the more grisly pieces of lost media. In much of Germany, the Love Parade was a widely known musical festival which served as a techno parade where hundreds of thousands would gather and celebrate the night away. The parade was held annually in Berlin from 1989 to 2003, then in 2006, 2007, and finally on July 24th, 2010. This parade turned festival was located at what was once a freight station in Duisburg with a maximum capacity of 250,000. Anywhere between this number and 1.4 million people actually showed, with 3,200 police also present. These were undoubtedly massive numbers. And yet, there are only 2 entrance and exit points of the festival area, both being ramps which faced east and west of the area, in order to ensure a better inflow into the festival area. Police formed a cordon in the middle of the primary ramp, so new arrivals couldn't enter the festival from behind, instructing all visitors to turn back to relieve overcrowding. However, people continued pushing through the confined space of the tunnel entrance and created periods of congestion. Soon enough, the crowd of at least 200,000 collapsed within the tunnel underpasses. And as police radios were faulty and first responders at the scene had no appropriate rescue strategy, the turbulence at the festival grew uncontrollable. In the crowd, bodies were crushed and twisted as concertgoers tried pushing their way through the ramp. Not only were audience members already restless due to a 1-hour delay of the show, but police made numerous oversights in forming cordons, which may have only harmed the situation. In total, 21 people fell victim to the Love Parade crowd disaster, all of whom died from crushed rib cages, and 652 more were injured. 10 event planners were prosecuted on charges of negligent manslaughter and bodily harm in a 2017 trial. However, because the alleged culpability of the defendants was found minor, the trial ended without a verdict in July of 2020, the deadline of the 10-year period of the statute of limitations. Still, performers and attendees alike have agreed that the 2010 Love Parade was inadequately planned and had insufficient safety measures. Since the tragedy, no Love Parades have ever been held again. The Republica Cromanon, or Cro-Magnon Republic in English, was a concert venue located in the Balvanera neighborhood of Buenos Aires, Argentina, and a regular site of festivities. Ran by Argentine impresario Omar Shaban, the club first opened in April of 2004, and on December 30th of the same year, an Argentine rock band named Callejeros was booked for a performance, their first at the club since its opening day. Callejeros were favorites among local concertgoers, and with New Year's Day being only a couple of days away, the venue was anticipating an audience of roughly 4,000 people ready to celebrate the night away with rock music and fireworks. However, what was expected to be a lively New Year's Eve event ultimately descended into a tragedy, one marked by faulty safety measures and a large loss of life. On the night of the concert, 4 of the nightclub's 6 exit doors were blocked off, including 2 fire exits which were chained shut so people would not enter without paying, in the words of the former mayor of Buenos Aires, Aníbal Ibarra. Furthermore, 10 of the nightclub's 15 fire extinguishers were inoperable, and without any fire detection system or fire suppression equipment, thousands in attendance were left completely vulnerable to any impending disaster. So, as crowd members began firing pyrotechnic flares inside the building, they were simultaneously ensuring a damning catastrophe. At around 10:40 p.m., flames from the set-off fireworks ignited foam in the ceiling and immediately spread to the rest of the building's flammable materials, including wood, acoustic panels, and string from a net, which eventually melted and rained down fire on the patrons. Pandemonium broke out as thousands attempted to escape through the few exit points in the building. But as carbon monoxide filled the air, time was running out for everyone inside. Hours passed, and the damage had been done by the time first responders arrived at the scene. In total, 194 lives were lost as a result of the inhalation of poisonous gases, and roughly 1,500 were injured, whether by burns or crowd crushes. The victims, who died within minutes due to the high concentration of cyanide, were primarily young adults, though among the casualties were also children and even infants. Aside from the aforementioned faults, Cromanon had exceeded its capacity of 1,500 by nearly 3 times, and future investigations revealed the nightclub was a month overdue for a fire hazard inspection, which further led to a complete reorganization of Buenos Aires' inspection system. The following trial saw judges hear from over 300 witnesses, who further highlighted the carelessness of Omar Shaban and other venue officials, and even how some members of Callejeros had encouraged audience members to fire flares, though it should be noted their lead singer did initially discourage such acts. Shaban received a 20-year prison sentence as a result of allowing a concert which should have never taken place under such circumstances, with other officials and members of Callejeros receiving similarly lengthy sentences. The then Argentine president Nestor Kirchner declared 3 days of national mourning following the disaster, and today, the families of the victims continue to preserve their memories as a reminder of the innocent lives lost too soon and of the consequences of lackluster venue security. This has been Zen. Take care.